What drives us to seek forever? This question, simple in its asking yet infinite in its implications, has echoed through human consciousness since we first understood that our days are numbered forever. The word itself carries weight beyond its syllables, promising escape from the one certainty that binds every breathing soul dot in the quiet hours before dawn. When sleep eludes us and thoughts turn inward, we feel it, that restless stirring, that unnamed hunger for something beyond the boundaries of flesh and time. We see it in the way children ask why flowers die, in the trembling hands of the elderly as they touch photographs of the departed, in the desperate bargains we make with fate when those we love slip beyond our reach. Perhaps no story captures this eternal human struggle more powerfully than the first one ever written down. Not carved in marble by Greeks who would come millennia later, not sung by bards in medieval halls, but pressed into clay tablets by scribes in a land between rivers, where civilization itself was still learning to speak its name. This is the tale of Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, seeker of immortality, the first hero whose story survived the turning of ages to reach us, carrying within its ancient verses the same questions that trouble our modern hearts. His journey, undertaken 5,000 years ago in the cradle of human civilization, speaks to something timeless within us all, the search for meaning in the face of mortality, the desperate hope that love might conquer death, the slow, painful wisdom that comes only through lost tonight. As you prepare for sleep, let us walk together through this most ancient of stories. Let us follow Gilgamesh from his throne in mighty Uruk to the edge of the world itself, where the secrets of eternal life wait in the hands of the flood survivor. Let us discover what our earliest ancestors understood about the price of being human, and perhaps find in their clay tablet wisdom something to ease our own restless hearts. Close your eyes. Feel yourself sinking into comfort, into safety. The modern world fades away. Traffic sounds become the whisper of reeds along the Euphrates. City lights transform into oil lamps flickering in palace windows. We are traveling backward through time, to the very beginning of recorded human storytelling, where the first questions that matter were first given voice. In Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, where barley grew golden in irrigated fields and ziggurats reached toward heaven like mountains built by mortal hands. Picture, if you will, a November afternoon in 1872. London sits shrouded in fog, gas lamps creating pools of yellow light along cobblestone streets. In the basement of the British Museum, a young assistant named George Smith bends over fragments of ancient clay, his eyes straining in the lamplight as he traces the wedge-shaped marks that scholars call cuneiform. 4 hours. He has been working on tablets recovered from the ruined library of Nineveh, that great Assyrian city where kings once collected the wisdom of ages. Fragment by fragment, word by word, he pieces together stories that have slept in darkness for over 2 millennia. Then something stops him cold. The signs he is reading describe a flood, a great deluge that covered the earth, a man warned by the gods to build a vessel and save the animals, a dove sent out to find dry land. The parallels to the biblical account of Noah are unmistakable, impossible to ignore, but this tablet is older, much older, carved centuries before Hebrew scribes set down their sacred texts. This story emerges from the very dawn of writing itself, carrying with it the authentic voice of humanity's childhood. Smith's hands tremble as he realizes what he has found, not just another myth, but evidence of the deep currents that flow beneath all human storytelling, proof that certain fears, certain hopes, certain fundamental questions about existence have haunted our species since we first learned to scratch our thoughts into clay. The tablets speak of ancient Sumer, where the first cities rose from marshland and desert. Ur and Uruk, Babylon and Nippur, names that ring like temple bells across the centuries. Here, in the land between the Tigris and Euphrates, human civilization took its first uncertain steps toward complexity, toward art, toward the written preservation of memory. The Sumerians gave us the wheel, the sailboat, the calendar. They gave us mathematics and astronomy, law codes and epic poetry. But perhaps their greatest gift was this, the first attempts to wrestle with what it means to be mortal in an indifferent universe. Their myths speak of gods who are capriciously human, prone to anger and jealousy, deception and regret. These were not the perfect deities of later theology, but powerful beings who struggled with the same fundamental questions that plague mortal hearts. Even immortals, it seems, could know loneliness, could make terrible mistakes, could face consequences they never intended. Among these ancient stories, one stands apart in its psychological sophistication, its emotional depth, its unflinching examination of friendship, loss, and the desperate human need to matter beyond the grave. The story of a king who possessed everything the world could offer, yet found himself empty. A ruler who discovered that even absolute power cannot touch the one enemy that claims every crown, every throne, every mortal frame. The Epic of Gilgamesh emerged from this world like a flower blooming in desert sand. Beautiful, impossible, yet somehow inevitable. Written in the ancient literary language of Akkadian, preserved on tablets that survived the fall of empires, the erosion of centuries, the forgetting of tongues, waiting in buried libraries for modern eyes to find them, to decode their secrets, to recognize in their clay-pressed words the oldest human story ever told. As George Smith worked by lamplight in that London basement, he could not have known that he was uncovering something far more precious than historical curiosity. He was recovering humanity's first attempt to answer the questions that still keep us awake at night. Questions about meaning and mortality, love and loss, the price of being human in a world that seems designed to break our hearts. The tablets whisper their secrets across the millennia. Listen carefully, and you can hear them still. Rise before dawn in ancient Uruk, and climb the great ziggurat of Anu as the first light touches the eastern horizon. From this height, you can see the full glory of the world's first true city spreading below you, a jeweled carpet woven from human ambition and divine blessing. Uruk, city of cities, home to 50,000 souls in an age when most humans still lived in villages of a few hundred. Here, between the life-giving canals that channel the Euphrates bounty, stands civilization's crown jewel, a testament to what mortals can achieve when they dare to dream beyond survival. The walls of Uruk stretch for 6 miles around the city's heart, built from mud brick and bitumen, thick enough for chariots to race along their tops. These walls will stand for centuries, protecting not just lives and property, but something more precious, the accumulated wisdom of humanity's first great experiment in urban living. Within these walls, narrow streets wind between houses of sun-dried brick, their flat roof serving as extra rooms where families gather in the evening to escape the day's heat. Markets buzz with activity as merchants haul goods from distant lands, copper from Anatolia, shells from the Persian Gulf, precious stones from mountains whose names have been forgotten. The air carries the scents of baking bread, brewing beer, and the incense that rises constantly from the city's many temples. But it is the palace that dominates both the skyline and the imagination. Rising in terraced splendor near the city's heart, it houses the king whose reputation spreads far beyond Uruk's walls. Gilgamesh, they call him, 2/3 divine, 1/3 mortal, son of the goddess Ninsun and the mortal king Lugalbonda, blessed by the gods with strength beyond measure, wisdom beyond his years, and beauty that makes both men and women weak with longing. Yet something is wrong in paradise. For all his divine gifts, Gilgamesh rules with a heavy hand. His strength knows no rival, his authority no check. When he desires a bride on her wedding night, who can deny him? When he calls the young men to labor on his grand projects, what father dares refuse? The king's pleasure has become the city's burden. He swims the law that governs every household dot in the streets. Citizens whisper their complaints to each other, but never loud enough for royal ears to hear. The old women shake their heads as they grind barley, remembering when kings served their people other than themselves. Young fathers keep their sons close, fearing the king's notice. Brides tremble on their wedding days, knowing that even the marriage bed may not be their own. The temples echo with prayers that sound like accusations. Divine Anu, the priests intone, "You gave us this king to protect us, but who will protect us from him? Mighty Enlil, you blessed him with power, but power without wisdom destroys what it means to preserve." From the sacred precincts, the complaints rise like smoke from sacrifice, carrying the people's distress to the assembly of the gods. In the celestial realm, the divine council stirs uneasily. They have watched their protege with growing concern, seeing how absolute power corrupts even the noblest heart. Gilgamesh paces his palace like a caged lion, magnificent and terrible. His courtiers approach with bowed heads and careful words, knowing that royal favor can shift like desert wind. He has everything a mortal could desire, wealth beyond counting, armies that make his enemies tremble, subjects who bow low at his approach. Yet still he is restless, still he searches for something that remains forever beyond his grasp. Perhaps it is the divine blood in his veins that makes him so unsatisfied with mortal pleasures. Or perhaps it is simply the curse of the exceptional, doomed to find themselves alone at the peak of human achievement, with no equal to share their burdens or challenge their choices. The king stands on his palace balcony as evening falls, watching the lights kindle throughout his city. Each flickering lamp represents a life, a family, a small world of hopes and fears and daily struggles. He rules them all, but knows none of them. He protects them all, but connects with none of them. In his loneliness, he becomes cruel. In his isolation, he becomes tyrannical. Power without companionship breeds arrogance. Strength without challenge breeds indifference to the weakness of others. The gods watch from their celestial heights, and slowly, they begin to plan an intervention that will change everything, for they understand what Gilgamesh does not. That even the mightiest king is only half a man without an equal to stand beside him. That true strength comes not from dominance, but from the courage to be vulnerable with another soul. The solution they devise is both elegant and dangerous. If Gilgamesh lacks an equal, they will create one. If he knows no rival, they will fashion one from the clay of the earth itself. A man to match him in strength, to challenge him in battle, and perhaps, if the gods are wise and fortune favorable, to become the friend his soul has been seeking without knowing it. In the wilderness beyond Uruk's walls, something stirs in the creative darkness. In the beginning was the clay, not the refined potter's clay of the city workshops, shaped by skilled hands into vessels of beauty and purpose, but the raw earth itself. The primal mud of river banks where reed and willow drink deep, where herons wade in the shallows and wild boars come to wallow in the heat of summer days. Here, in this place where civilization has not yet set its mark, the goddess Uruk kneels beside the waters of creation. Her hands, which once helped fashion the first humans from the dust of the earth, move with ancient purpose through the fertile mud. She gathers clay rich with life, dark with the promise of growing things, and begins to shape a form that has never existed before. This is not the delicate work of an artisan, but the bold creation of a deity who understands that sometimes the world requires not refinement, but raw power, not grace, but primal strength, not civilization, but the wild wisdom that runs in the blood of untamed things. The figure taking shape beneath her hands is magnificent in its simplicity, tall as a man, but broader through the shoulders, with limbs that speak of endless strength, and eyes that will see clearly in the darkest forest. His hair will grow long and wild, uncut by any blade, flowing like a mane down his back. His feet will know every path through the wilderness, every game trail and water source, every safe place to shelter when storms blow in from the desert. But our Uruk is creating more than just another human form. Into this clay vessel, she breathes something that has been missing from the world, the perfect balance to Gilgamesh's civilized power. Where the king is refined, this one will be raw. Where Gilgamesh is sophisticated, this man will be innocent. Where the ruler of Uruk has learned to think before he acts, this child of the wilderness will trust his instincts absolutely. When the work is finished, when the last details of sinew and bone have been perfectly formed, Uruk steps back and speaks the word that separates intention from reality. The clay shivers, warms, and suddenly draws its first breath. Enkidu opens his eyes to a world that welcomes him like a long-lost son. The gazelles approach without fear, recognizing in him no threat, but a kinship they have never known with other humans. The lions accept him into their pride, teaching him their silent language of scent and sound and subtle movement. The wild cattle allow him to run beside them across the grasslands, sharing their knowledge of weather and season, danger and safety. 4 months that stretch into years. Enkidu lives as no human has ever lived before. He drinks from streams with the deer, sleeps under stars that shine down on his naked shoulders, runs through meadows with the wild horses until his heart pounds with pure joy. He knows every creature by its track, every plant by its taste, every bird by its call. His strength grows beyond mortal measure. He can wrestle bulls to the ground, outrun the fastest antelope, lift stones that would challenge a dozen ordinary men. Yet he uses this power only to protect, never to dominate. He becomes the guardian of the wild places, the defender of creatures that cannot defend themselves. When hunters set their snares along the game trails, Enkidu follows behind and springs every trap. When herders drive their flocks into wild pastures, he turns them back with gentle but irresistible force. The wilderness has found its champion, and he guards it with the fierce love of a mother protecting her children. But the wild heart, for all its purity, is still a lonely heart. As months pass, Enkidu begins to feel the stirrings of something he cannot name, a restlessness that cannot be satisfied by running with wolves or sleeping beneath open sky, a longing for something beyond the perfect contentment of animal existence. He finds himself staring at the distant gleam of city lights on the horizon, wondering what draws his gaze toward those alien fires. He listens to the night wind and hears in it the echo of voices speaking words he almost understands. In his dreams, he sees faces that wear expressions of emotions he has never felt, but somehow recognizes. The gods watch his growing restlessness with satisfaction. They have created exactly what they intended, a being powerful enough to challenge Gilgamesh, pure enough to change him, yet incomplete enough to need what only human connection can provide. Now they must engineer the meeting that will transform them both. The plan they devise is subtle, working through human agents who believe they are following their own desires. It begins with a trapper, a simple man who makes his living catching small game in the borderlands between civilization and wilderness. Day after day, he finds his snares empty, his careful work undone by unseen hands. Frustrated and growing poor, he seeks help from his father, a wise man who has lived long enough to recognize when mortal problems have divine origins. "My son," the old man says, "this is no ordinary poacher you face. Go to Uruk, seek audience with mighty Gilgamesh. Tell him of this wild man who protects the animals from human hunters. Ask him to send a temple woman, one skilled in the arts of love and civilization, for there is only one way to separate a man from the wild. Show him what it means to be human." And so the trap is set, not with ropes and stakes, but with the most irresistible snare of all, the promise of connection between two souls who do not yet know they are incomplete without each other. In Uruk, Gilgamesh listens to the trapper's tale with growing interest. Here, perhaps, is the challenge his spirit has been craving. Here is the distraction his restless heart requires. He summons Shamhat, most skilled of the temple women, keeper of sacred mysteries, initiating the rites that bridged the gap between mortal flesh and divine ecstasy. To her, he entrusts a mission that will change the course of 3 lives forever. Go, he commands. Find this wild man, civilize him, bring him to me, that I might look upon this wonder and judge whether he is worthy to stand in my presence. Neither king nor priestess suspects that they are playing roles in a drama scripted by the gods themselves. Neither understands that the meeting they are arranging will shatter both their worlds and forge something entirely new from the pieces dot in the wilderness. Enkidu feels the change coming like a storm on the horizon. Something is approaching that will transform his simple world of fur and forest into something complex and painful and wonderful beyond his ability to imagine. The age of innocence is ending. The age of knowledge is about to begin. 7 days' journey from Uruk, where the cultivated fields give way to wild grassland, and the sound of human voices fades to memory. There stands a grove of ancient trees beside a spring of sweet water. Here, where deer come to drink at dawn and lions seek shade from the merciless sun, destiny prepares to fulfill itself through the oldest story ever told. The moment when innocence encounters knowledge and the world changes forever. Shamhat arrives with the dawn, her traveling clothes dusty from the long journey, her escort of guards already turning back toward the safety of civilization. She has ventured farther from the city than any woman of her station should, carrying with her the sacred oils and perfumes of her calling, the soft garments and jeweled ornaments that mark her as a daughter of Ishtar's temple. Yet for all her divine training, all her ritual knowledge of the mysteries that connect flesh with spirit, she is not prepared for what she sees when Enkidu first emerges from the forest shadows. He moves like flowing water, like wind through grass, with a grace that makes her trained temple dancers seem clumsy by comparison. His body speaks of perfect strength held in perfect balance, unmarked by the scars and calluses that civilized labor leaves on mortal flesh. His hair flows wild and free, unbound by any ornament save the flowers that the wind has woven there. But it is his eyes that stop her breath. They hold the clarity of deep water, the absolute attention of a creature that lives entirely in the present moment. There is no calculation in his gaze, no hidden agenda, no social mask. He looks at her with the pure interest of a child discovering something beautiful and new, for a heartbeat that stretches into eternity. They simply stare at each other across the space that separates nature from civilization, innocence from experience, the world that was from the world that will be. Then Shamhat, trained in arts older than writing, begins to weave the spell that will bind him forever to human consciousness. She moves like music made visible, like prayer given form. Her garments fall away like flower petals, revealing the sacred geometry of the human form blessed by divine touch. She speaks to him in the universal language that needs no words, the communication that flows through glance and gesture, through the tilt of a head and the curve of a smile. Enkidu approaches like a wild creature drawn to flame, knowing instinctively that this moment will transform him, unable to resist its pull. When their hands first touch, when their bodies first join in the ancient dance that creates and destroys and recreates the self, the very air around them seems to shimmer with possibility. For 6 days and 7 nights, they lose themselves in each other, exploring the mysteries that can only be discovered through absolute surrender to another soul. Shamhat teaches him pleasures he never knew existed, showing him how touch can be worship, how vulnerability can be strength, how the joining of two separate beings can create something greater than the sum of its parts. But with knowledge comes loss. On the 7th day, when Enkidu tries to rejoin his animal companions, they flee from him in terror. The scent of humanity clings to him now, marking him as forever separate from the innocence he once shared. The gazelles who once welcomed him now see a stranger. The lions who accepted him as pride brother now recognize an alien presence that disturbs their natural order. For the first time in his existence, Enkidu knows loneliness. For the first time, he understands loss. The world paradise that was his entire world has rejected him, and he finds himself suspended between two states of being, belonging fully to neither. Shamhat, wise in the ways of transformation, wraps him in the soft garments of civilization and speaks to him of compensation for what he has lost. Mourn not for the animals who no longer know you, she says gently. You have gained something far more precious, the capacity for a human connection, for love that transcends the simple bonds of pack and herd. She tells him of cities where thousands of people live together in harmony, of arts and crafts that transform raw materials into objects of beauty, of music and poetry and the countless inventions that make human life rich with meaning. She speaks of friendship deeper than any animal bond, of love that can transcend even death itself. And she tells him of Gilgamesh. In Uruk, she says, there rules a king like no other, 2/3 divine, 1/3 mortal, blessed with strength that has no equal and wisdom beyond his years. Yet he is alone as you have been alone, for there is no man alive who can stand as his equal. Her words kindle something in Enkidu's transformed heart. This king, this lonely figure of power and wisdom, calls to something newly awakened in his consciousness. Perhaps, he thinks, this is why the gods allowed him to be created. Perhaps this meeting is his destiny. As they journey toward Uruk, Shamhat continues his education in human ways. She teaches him to eat bread instead of grass, to drink beer instead of stream water, to cover his body with oil and cloth as protection against sun and wind. Each lesson moves him further from his animal past and closer to the human future that awaits him. But the most important lesson cannot be taught with words. It can only be discovered through experience, through the shock of recognition that comes when two souls finally find their perfect match. The walls of Uruk rise before them as they crest the final hill, glowing golden in the afternoon sun, a vision from divine realms. Enkidu stares in wonder at humanity's greatest achievement, at the ordered complexity that thousands of cooperating souls can create. Somewhere within those walls, Gilgamesh waits unknowing for the meeting that will define both their lives. The king has been troubled by strange dreams lately, visions of a mighty adversary approaching his city, of battles that end not in victory or defeat, but in something far more mysterious, a joining that transforms both combatants into something neither could achieve alone. The gods watch from their celestial heights as their long-planned reunion finally approaches. They have shaped events with subtle care, bringing to solitary beings toward the collision that will either destroy them both or forge them into something the world has never seen. Friends whose bond transcends even the love between man and woman. Brothers whose loyalty will survive every test that mortality can devise. As evening falls over Uruk, as the city settles into the rhythms of another day's end, neither king nor challenger suspects that their lives are about to change forever. That tomorrow will bring not just a contest of strength, but the birth of a friendship that will be remembered long after their mortal forms have returned to dust. In the temple of Ishtar, the sacred fires burn bright, as if the goddess herself anticipates the transformation to come. The age of solitude is ending. The age of brotherhood is about to begin. The dream comes to Gilgamesh in the depths of night, vivid as waking life yet strange as fever visions. He sees a star fall from heaven, blazing like a comet as it descends toward Uruk's walls. The people of the city gather to marvel at this celestial visitor, but when the king approaches to examine it, he finds not a star, but an axe of incredible weight, forged from some metal that exists nowhere on earth. He struggles to lift this divine weapon, straining with all his God-given strength, yet it resists his efforts like a mountain rooted in the earth's core. Then, suddenly, it yields to his touch, and he embraces it with the fierce joy of a warrior claiming his destined blade. With the tender care of a lover holding his beloved, Gilgamesh wakes with his heart pounding. the dream's intensity lingering like the taste of honey on his tongue. He summons his mother, the wise goddess Ninsen, seeking her interpretation of these strange night visions that have troubled his sleep for 7 consecutive nights. "My son," she says, her voice carrying the weight of divine foresight, "the star that fell from heaven represents a man who approaches our city. He will become your companion. Mighty as you are mighty, loyal as you are loyal. You will love him as you love yourself, for he is the answer to your soul's longing. But understanding and acceptance are different things entirely. When word reaches the palace that a wild man has entered Uruk, that he moves through the streets like a force of nature, challenging the established order with his very presence, Gilgamesh feels not relief, but a strange mixture of anticipation and territorial pride. The confrontation comes, as such things must, when order collides with chaos. It is the night of a wedding feast in Uruk's merchant quarter, where a young scribe is to take his bride according to custom and law. The celebration spills from the family courtyard into the narrow street, filling the evening air with music and laughter, with the scent of roasted meat and honeyed wine. But as the ceremonial moment approaches, when the groom should lead his veiled bride to the marriage chamber, a massive figure blocks their path. Enkidu stands in the street like a living statue carved from bronze and determination. 7 days of civilization have transformed his appearance, but not his essential nature. Clothed now in fine garments, his wild hair bound with gold, he looks like a prince of some distant realm. Yet his eyes burn with righteous anger as he confronts a custom that his newly awakened conscience cannot accept. "No," he says, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent courtyard. "This is not right. No king should claim first privilege with every bride, no matter how ancient the custom. This woman belongs to her chosen husband, not to royal pleasure." The wedding guests freeze in shock. No one has dared challenge the king's prerogatives for longer than memory serves. The very air seems to thicken with tension as word spreads through the crowd. A stranger defies the king's ancient right. Gilgamesh arrives like a storm wind given human form, his royal robes billowing behind him, his eyes blazing with fury at this unprecedented challenge to his authority. The crowd parts before him like water before the prow of a ship, leaving a clear path to the stranger who dares question his divine right. For a moment that feels eternal, the two men simply stare at each other across the space that separates them. Recognition flickers between them like lightning between storm clouds. The shocking awareness that they are looking into a mirror that reflects not appearance but essence. Here stands strength facing strength, will confronting will, divine heritage challenging divine heritage. The very air around them seems to vibrate with potential energy, like the moment before thunder breaks. Then, without words or warning, they come together like forces of nature colliding. The battle that follows defies description and demands it. They grapple with the fury of lions fighting for territory, with the focused intensity of master wrestlers who have finally found worthy opponents. Enkidu's wild strength meets Gilgamesh's trained technique in a contest that shakes the very foundations of the buildings around them. They crash through the wedding courtyard, sending tables flying and scattering terrified guests. They roll across cobblestones worn smooth by centuries of foot traffic, their contest marked by the groaning of strained stone and the sharp crack of splintering wood. Wherever their battle takes them, Enkidu fights with the primal fury of the wilderness. Using holds and throws, he learned wrestling bulls and lions. His movements flow like water, like wine through grass, impossible to predict or counter through conventional technique alone. Gilgamesh responds with the refined skill of a king trained from childhood in the arts of war, combining his divine strength with tactics learned from the greatest masters of combat. His attacks are precise as a sculptor's chisel, each move calculated to maximum effect. They are perfectly matched, and therein lies both the glory and the futility of their contest. For every advantage one gains, the other finds a counter. For every hold one applies, the other discovers an escape. They fight with the desperate intensity of men who have never met their equals, who have always been the strongest, the fastest, the most skilled in any company. The battle rages through the night, carrying them from street to street. The people of Uruk watch in amazement from windows and rooftops. Never have they seen such a display of pure physical power, such a marriage of strength and skill and absolute determination. As dawn approaches, as their bodies begin to show the toll of their epic struggle, something shifts between them. The fury that drove them to combat transforms into something deeper: respect, recognition, the dawning awareness that they are witnessing something unprecedented in their experience. They pause, breathing hard, studying each other with new eyes. The anger that sparked their confrontation has burned away, leaving behind something infinitely more valuable: understanding. Gilgamesh sees in Enkidu not a challenger to his authority, but the companion his soul has always craved. Here stands someone who can match his strength without being overwhelmed by it, who can challenge his decisions without being intimidated by his power. Enkidu sees in Gilgamesh not a tyrant to be overthrown, but a kindred spirit trapped by the isolation that comes with exceptional gifts. Here stands someone who understands the burden of being different, the loneliness of having no equals. Without words, they reach the same conclusion simultaneously. This contest has no winner because it needs no winner. They have both found something far more precious than victory. They have found each other. The embrace that follows will be remembered in song and story for as long as human memory endures. To mighty men, blooded by battle, but joined now in brotherhood, hold each other with the fierce joy of souls finally made complete. In that moment, the loneliness that has defined both their lives simply dissolves, replaced by a connection deeper than blood, stronger than steel, more enduring than stone. The people of Uruk cheer as the dawn breaks over their city, understanding instinctively that they have witnessed the birth of something legendary. Their king has found his equal, his complement, his truest friend. And in finding each other, Gilgamesh and Enkidu discover that they are both far more than they ever imagined possible alone. The age of solitary greatness has ended. The age of shared destiny has begun. In the weeks that follow their epic confrontation, Uruk transforms. The change begins subtly, in the way servants move through the palace halls with lighter steps, in the sound of genuine laughter echoing from the royal chambers for the first time in memory. Gilgamesh, who once paced his domain like a restless predator, now walks with the easy confidence of a man who has found his place in the world. Enkidu proves to be everything the king's soul required: an equal in strength, a matching courage, and surprisingly, a voice of conscience that tempers royal impulse with wisdom. Where Gilgamesh sees only what he desires, Enkidu sees the consequences for others. Where the king acts from authority, his friend counsels from compassion. Together, they wander the city that has become Enkidu's new wilderness to explore. The former wild man marvels at the complexity of human civilization, the irrigation canals that bring life to the desert, the workshops where craftsmen transform raw materials into objects of beauty and utility, the schools where children learn to read the mysterious marks that preserve human knowledge across generations. But it is the people themselves who fascinate him most. In the wilderness, relationships were simple: predator and prey, parent and offspring, members of the same herd or pack. Human connections reveal themselves as infinitely more complex, woven from threads of obligation and affection, rivalry and cooperation, love and duty and choice. He watches a potter teaching his son the secrets of clay and fire, sees how knowledge passes from generation to generation, the sacred flame. He observes merchants bargaining in the marketplace, negotiating not just price, but reputation, status, the intricate dance of social position. He studies the temple rituals, where priests mediate between mortal concerns and divine will, translating human hopes into language the gods might understand. Through Enkidu's eyes, Gilgamesh rediscovers his own kingdom. The ruler who once saw only subjects and resources begins to perceive individuals, each carrying their own dreams and fears, their own small but vital stories. The compassion that his friend brings to every interaction slowly awakens dormant empathy in the king's heart. Yet for all their growing wisdom, for all the mellowing influence of their friendship, they remain young men, blessed with divine strength and cursed with mortal restlessness. Peace, they discover, can be as challenging as conflict in its own way. It is Gilgamesh who first voices the thought that has been building in both their minds like pressure behind a dam. They sit on the palace roof as the evening falls, watching the last light fade from the western horizon, sharing bread and beer while the city settles into the rhythms of night. My friend, the king says quietly, do you ever feel that we are wasting something precious? This strength the gods gave us, this courage that could move mountains, what purpose does it serve if we spend our days in comfort and safety? Enkidu nods slowly, understanding perfectly the restlessness that gnaws at his companion's soul. In the wild, he replies, every day brought challenge, danger, the need to prove oneself worthy of survival. Here, surrounded by walls and guards and the certainty of tomorrow's meal, sometimes I feel as though I am slowly forgetting who I am. The conversation that follows will change the course of their lives and echo through history. For Gilgamesh, in his growing wisdom, has conceived an ambition worthy of their combined greatness, an expedition that will test their courage, display their strength, and perhaps most importantly, create a legacy that will outlive their mortal forms. Far to the northwest, beyond the settled lands, beyond even the reach of Uruk's trading expeditions, lies the cedar forest, ancient beyond human memory, vast beyond mortal comprehension. It stretches across mountain slopes like a green ocean frozen in time. These are not the modest trees that grow near human settlements, carefully tended and harvested for their wood. These are titans of the plant kingdom, cedars so old they were already giants when the first cities rose from the Mesopotamian mud. The fragrance of their resin carries on the wind for miles, a scent so pure it makes the heart ache with longing. Their wood, when cut, reveals grain patterns like frozen music, timber so perfect it seems carved by divine hands. Kings and gods alike prize these trees above gold, above precious stones, above any treasure the earth produces. But the cedar forest is not unguarded. Deep in its green heart dwells Humbaba, the terrible guardian appointed by Enlil himself to protect the sacred groves. No mortal has seen him and lived to describe his features, but the stories that reach civilized lands speak of a creature beyond the boundaries of natural form. Some say he has the body of a man, but the face of a lion, twisted into expressions of perpetual rage. Others whisper that he appears as a living whirlwind, his voice the sound of splitting rock, his breath the heat of desert storms. What all agree upon is his power. Humbaba can hear a footstep on the forest floor from 3 days' journey away. His roar levels mountains. His breath withers every green thing in its path. The very trees bend away from his presence, creating clearings where nothing grows, circles of devastation that mark his passing. This vision of impossible challenge kindles something deep in both their souls, the recognition that comfortable victory over mortal opponents can never satisfy hearts touched by divine ambition. Here lies a test worthy of their friendship, a goal that demands everything they have learned about courage, strategy, and mutual trust. As the stars wheel overhead in their ancient patterns, as the night settles around them with the weight of approaching destiny, both friends feel the pull of adventure, calling them toward the greatest challenge of their lives. The age of simple contentment is ending. The age of legendary deeds is about to begin. 20 days through the desert, 20 nights beneath stars that seem to watch their progress with ancient, unblinking eyes. The journey to the cedar forest tests every aspect of their preparation, every reserve of strength and endurance they possess. By day, the sun beats down like a bronze hammer on an anvil, turning the sand beneath their feet into a furnace that sears through leather sandals. By night, the temperature plunges until their breath forms clouds and their water supplies freeze in their containers. Yet they press forward with the inexorable determination of fate itself. Gilgamesh leads with the confidence of one who has never doubted his destiny, while Enkidu follows with the steady persistence of one who understands that some journeys, once begun, can only be completed or abandoned with honor lost forever. They ration their water with mathematical precision, calculating each drop against the distance remaining. Their food supplies dwindle despite careful planning, forcing them to supplement their provisions with whatever the wasteland provides. Bitter roots that barely sustain life, insects that crunch between their teeth like tiny stones, the occasional lizard caught sunning itself on heated rocks. The desert tests more than their physical endurance. In the vast emptiness between settlements, where the horizon stretches unbroken in every direction, the mind begins to play tricks. Mirages dance just beyond reach, promising impossible oases that dissolve into shimmer and heat when approached. The silence grows so complete it seems to press against their eardrums like water at great depth. On the 10th day, Enkidu begins to doubt, not their mission, for he would follow Gilgamesh into the underworld itself if required, but the wisdom of their quest. In the trackless waste, with their supplies running low and no sign of the forest yet visible, he feels the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a vulture with iron wings. "My friend," he says quietly as they shelter beneath a rocky overhang during the heat of noon. "Perhaps the gods are trying to tell us something through these hardships. Perhaps Humbaba is meant to remain undisturbed, the cedar forest protected from mortal hands." But Gilgamesh's determination burns brighter than the desert sun. "The gods test us," he replies, his voice cracked from thirst but still strong with conviction. "They want to see if we are truly worthy of the glory we seek. Every hardship we endure proves our right to achieve the impossible." On the 15th day, when their water is nearly gone and hope has become as rare as shade, they crest a rise and see it, a line of green on the distant horizon, dark against the bleached sky like a promise made manifest. The cedar forest, vast beyond imagination, ancient beyond memory, beautiful and terrible of the power that guards it. The sight fills them with renewed energy. They cover the remaining distance in 3 days of forced march, driven by anticipation and the fear that if they slow their pace, their resolution might falter before they reach their goal. As they draw closer to the forest's edge, the very air begins to change. The dry, sterile breath of the desert gives way to something rich and complex, the green scent of growing things, the loamy smell of earth that has never known the bite of plough or the weight of human feet. Pine resin and cedar oil drift on breezes that carry bird songs unknown in the settled world. The trees themselves defy comprehension. Rising like pillars in some cosmic temple, their trunks stretch so wide that 20 men holding hands could not encircle them. Their crowns disappear into the green canopy far overhead, creating a ceiling so dense that only scattered shafts of sunlight penetrate to the forest floor below. Standing at the forest's edge, Gilgamesh and Enkidu feel like children confronting their first sight of the sea. The scale overwhelms human perception, reducing them to insignificance beneath the weight of vegetable eternity. These trees were ancient when the first humans learned to chip flint into tools. They will still be standing when the last star burns out in the cooling sky. But it is not the tree's age or size that stops their breath. It is the absolute silence that fills the spaces between their trunks. No insect buzz disturbs the air. No bird calls echo through the green cathedral. Even their own footsteps seem muffled, as though the forest swallows sound the way deep water swallows light. This is not the comfortable quiet of civilized gardens or the natural hush of ordinary woods. This is the silence of a realm that exists outside normal boundaries, where different laws apply and different powers hold dominion. As they penetrate deeper into the forest, following what might charitably be called a path, both men feel the weight of unseen observation. Eyes that cannot be located watch their every movement. Breath that cannot be heard stirs the air around them. A presence vast and ancient and filled with barely contained rage tracks their progress through its domain. The battle rages through 3 days and nights, transforming the sacred clearing into a wasteland of shattered trees and churned earth. Humbaba fights with the fury of elemental forces, his attacks leveling ancient cedars that have stood since the world's youth. His breath scorches the ground bare, leaving patches where nothing will grow for generations to come. Yet for all his terrible power, he faces opponents blessed by the gods themselves and bonded by friendship stronger than blood. Gilgamesh moves like lightning given human form, his weapons finding gaps in defenses that should be impenetrable. Enkidu fights with the wild cunning of his forest youth, reading patterns in chaos, anticipating attacks from directions that logic cannot predict. Together, they weave around their massive opponent like hunters bringing down a mammoth, each supporting the other's movements in a dance of death that has never been performed before and will never be repeated. When Gilgamesh stumbles, Enkidu covers his retreat. When Enkidu's strength fails, Gilgamesh draws the guardian's attention until his friend can recover. The tide turns on the 3rd day, when Shamash, god of the sun and patron of heroes, intervenes on their behalf. Divine winds rise from 8 directions simultaneously, pinning Humbaba in place just long enough for the 2 friends to close for the killing stroke. The guardian falls like a toppled mountain, his death cry echoing across the forest with such force that birds take flight 100 miles away. As his massive form settles into stillness, the unnatural silence that has gripped the forest for eons finally breaks. Normal sounds return, the buzz of insects, the call of birds, the whisper of wind through leaves that seem to sigh with relief. Victory should taste sweet. Yet both heroes find themselves strangely subdued as they stand over their fallen enemy. Humbaba's face, peaceful now in death, reveals features more human than monstrous. In his open eyes, they see not the fury of a supernatural guardian, but the exhaustion of a creature who has spent centuries protecting something he loves from those who would destroy it. He was only doing his duty, Enkidu says quietly, cleaning blood from his weapons with hands that shake from exhaustion and something that might be regret. Enlil appointed him to guard these trees, and he gave his life to fulfill that trust. Gilgamesh nods slowly, understanding for the first time that great deeds often carry unexpected weight. They have achieved what they came for, proven themselves worthy of legend, but the price has been the death of a being whose only crime was loyalty to divine command. As they set about the grim work of harvesting cedar beams for their return journey, Humbaba's death cry reaches the halls of heaven. Enlil, lord of earth and storm, rises from his throne in rage that shakes the foundations of creation. The cedar wood they claim transforms Uruk beyond recognition. Temples rise with unprecedented grandeur, their frameworks proof against fire and time. Ships sail to distant lands, carrying trade and knowledge to peoples who had never imagined such vessels possible. Yet beneath the celebration of their triumph runs an undercurrent of divine displeasure that will soon demand its own accounting. For the gods have marked their defiance, and cosmic justice moves with the patience of mountains and the inevitability of sunrise toward a reckoning that will teach both heroes the true price of challenging powers beyond mortal understanding. The seasons turn, and with them comes a visitor to Uruk whose beauty blazes like the morning star, whose presence fills the palace with the intoxicating scent of myrrh and roses. Ishtar, goddess of love and war, queen of heaven and earth, descends from her celestial realm with desire burning in her immortal heart. She comes seeking Gilgamesh, not as a petitioner begging favors from a mortal king, but as a goddess offering gifts beyond imagination to one she deems worthy of divine attention. Her proposal, delivered in the throne room before assembled courtiers who dare not meet her blazing gaze, promises pleasures that would make other men weep with longing. Marry me, glorious Gilgamesh. Her voice rings like silver bells across marble halls. Come to me as husband, and I will give you a chariot of lapis lazuli and gold, with wheels of gold and horns of amber. Storm demons will I harness to pull it, who devour the day. When you enter our house, threshold and days will kiss your feet. Kings and rulers will bow before you, bringing tribute from mountain and plain. Your goats will bear triplets, your sheep twins. Your donkey will outrun the mule. Your horse at the chariot will have no rival. Your oxen will have no equal. The offer staggers in its magnificence. To become consort to the greatest goddess, to share her divine bed and rule beside her in halls that stretch beyond mortal comprehension. What king could refuse such destiny? Yet Gilgamesh, tempered by friendship and hardened by the wisdom that comes from facing real danger, sees past the glittering surface to the darkness beneath. He knows the stories, the long history of Ishtar's mortal lovers and their invariably tragic fates. Divine passion, he understands, burns too hot for mortal hearts to survive. His response, delivered in the courtly language of diplomacy, but edged with steel, cuts through the goddess's seduction like a blade through silk. What am I to give you if I take you in marriage? He asks, his voice carrying across the silent hall. Am I to give you oil for your body, and clothing, bread and food, food fit for divinity, drink fit for royalty? What would I gain by taking you as wife? But his rejection goes deeper than practical concerns. With the reckless courage that has defined his every great deed, Gilgamesh recites the roll call of Ishtar's previous lovers, each name a testament to divine love's destructive power. You loved Tammuz, the lover of your youth, yet you condemned him to the underworld. You loved the many-colored roller bird, yet you broke his wing. You loved the lion perfect in strength, yet you dug for him pits 7 by 7. You loved the stallion magnificent in battle, yet you ordained for him whip and spur and goad. You loved the shepherd, yet you struck him down and turned him into a wolf. The catalogue continues, each accusation landing like a physical blow. The goddess's face transforms from seductive beauty to something terrible, divine rage barely contained within mortal seeming form. The very air around her begins to shimmer with heat, and the gold ornaments in the hall start to glow as though touched by forged fire. Enkidu watches this confrontation with growing alarm. He has lived among wild things, has felt the terrible weight of natural forces when they turn destructive. What he sees building in Ishtar's eyes makes mountain storms seem like gentle breezes, makes the fury of charging bulls seem like lamb-like docility. For a moment that stretches toward eternity, silence fills the hall like water rising in a flood. Even the servants seem to have stopped breathing, sensing that they stand at the fulcrum point where divine will pivot toward retribution. When Ishtar speaks again, her voice carries the cold finality of glacial ice breaking apart. You'll regret this insult, Gilgamesh. You will learn that mortal pride, however justified, cannot shield you from divine wrath. What you refuse to give freely, I will take by force. What you will not offer in love, you will surrender in fear. She vanishes in a column of flame that leaves the very stones of the floor cracked and smoking, but her presence lingers like the aftermath of lightning, leaving every soul in the chamber shaken to its core. In the celestial realm, Ishtar storms through the halls of heaven like a hurricane given consciousness. Her rage shakes the foundations of divine palaces, sending lesser gods scurrying for shelter. When she reaches the throne of her father Anu, sovereign of the sky, her demand rings out with the force of a royal command. Father, give me the ball of heaven, that I may kill Gilgamesh. He has insulted me beyond endurance, catalogued my loves as though they were crimes, refused me as though I were some common mortal woman. Anu, ancient in wisdom and wary of his daughter's volatile nature, attempts to counsel moderation, but Ishtar's fury will not be deflected by reason or turned aside by paternal authority. Her threat echoes through heaven like thunder announcing the end of the world. If you do not give me the ball of heaven, I will break down the gates of the underworld and let the dead rise to devour the living. The dead will outnumber the living. Death itself will lose its meaning. Faced with such catastrophic consequences, Anu reluctantly yields. The ball of heaven, a creature of such terrible power that its very presence can split the earth apart, is unleashed upon the mortal world. Its mission, to destroy the king who dared spurn divine love. In Uruk, the first sign of approaching doom comes as a tremor that runs through the city's foundations like a giant's footstep. Animals flee in panic. Birds take to the sky in vast, confused flocks. The very air seems to thicken with approaching dread. Then, on the horizon beyond the city walls, something impossible appears, a creature that defies the natural order, vast beyond comprehension, its body gleaming with bronze and gold, its eyes burning like stars. The ball of heaven, divine instrument of cosmic vengeance, approaches Uruk with the inevitability of fate itself. Its first breath creates a chasm in the earth, so deep that 100 men fall into its depths. Its second breath claims 200 more. With each step, the very ground cracks and splits, opening wounds in the earth that may never heal. Gilgamesh and Enkidu watch this approaching catastrophe from the palace walls, understanding with perfect clarity that they face their greatest challenge yet, not a guardian defending his domain, but a force of pure destruction sent by the gods themselves to punish mortal presumption. Yet they do not flee. They do not beg for mercy or attempt to placate divine anger through sacrifice and supplication. Instead, they arm themselves with the finest weapons their city can provide and stride out to meet divine wrath with mortal courage blazing in their hearts. The battle that follows shakes the foundations of both earth and heaven, lasting 7 hours of cosmic fury, but through perfect coordination, born of absolute trust, through courage that transforms mortal limitation into something approaching divine power, they bring down the impossible creature that was sent to destroy them. When the bull's final breath escapes its divine lungs, when its massive form settles into stillness, both heroes stand victorious, but strangely subdued. They have defeated a force sent by the gods themselves, yet somehow this triumph feels less like victory than like the crossing of a line, from which there can be no return. As Enkidu tears out the bull's heart and hurls it at Ishtar's temple walls in defiant gesture, neither friend suspects that this moment of triumph marks the beginning of their greatest tragedy, that the gods, twice defied, are already preparing a punishment more terrible than any monster they could send, a lesson that will teach them both the true meaning of loss. It begins as nothing more than a slight fever, a flush across Enkidu's cheeks that might be attributed to their recent exertions against the ball of heaven. He dismisses it as fatigue, the natural consequence of battles that would challenge gods themselves. But Gilgamesh, who knows his friend's body as well as his own soul, notices the subtle changes that herald something far more serious. The color in Enkidu's eyes seems slightly faded, like bronze that has lost its polish. His movements, always fluid as flowing water, carry the faintest suggestion of stiffness. Most troubling of all, he begins to dream, not the normal dreams that visit mortal sleep, filled with memories and wishes and the mind's attempt to process daily experience, but visions that carry the weight of divine revelation. He sees himself descending through layers of earth toward a realm where the sun never shines, where the dead cluster like birds in a cosmic cave, their wings beating futilely against darkness absolute. I dreamed of the underworld, he tells Gilgamesh on the third morning, his voice carrying unusual gravity. I saw the house where the dead dwell, where dust is their bread and clay their food. They are clothed like birds with wings for garments, and light is never seen there. The king's blood runs cold at these words, for such dreams come only to those whom death has marked for its own. Yet he forces lightness into his voice, refusing to acknowledge the fear that grips his heart like iron talons. Dreams are shadows of shadows, he replies, though his words sound hollow even to himself. They have no power over those who live in light, who breathe the air of the living world. But Enkidu's condition worsens with each passing day. The fever that began as a gentle warmth becomes a raging fire that no amount of cool water can quench. His skin, once bronzed by sun and wind, takes on a pallor that speaks of essential life slowly draining away. Most terrible of all, he begins to waste visibly, his magnificent strength ebbing like water from a cracked vessel. The finest physicians in Uruk gather at his bedside, bringing all their accumulated knowledge to bear against this mysterious ailment. They burn incense to drive away malevolent spirits, prepare potions from herbs gathered at the world's edge, perform rituals designed to restore the balance between body and soul. Nothing helps. If anything, their ministrations seem only to accelerate his decline. Gilgamesh refuses to leave his friend's side, maintaining a vigil that gradually transforms from hopeful care into desperate denial. He speaks constantly to the fevered man, recounting their adventures, planning expeditions they will never take, describing the future that stretches before them like an endless golden road. When you recover, he says, though Enkidu's breathing grows more labored each day, we will sail beyond the edges of the known world. We will discover islands where strange peoples dwell, where customs unknown to civilized lands might teach us new ways of being human. Enkidu smiles at these fantasies, understanding with the clarity that sometimes comes to the dying that his friend needs these hopeful words more than he does. The wild man who once ran with lions has learned to love more deeply than he ever thought possible, and that love now requires him to comfort the one who should be comforting him. My king, he whispers, his voice barely audible above the rasp of struggling breath. I do not fear the journey that awaits me. I have lived more in these few years of friendship than in all my previous existence. The wilderness gave me life, but you gave me meaning. As the days pass, Enkidu's dreams grow more vivid and more disturbing. He sees the judges of the underworld, ancient beings whose wisdom encompasses all the sorrows that have ever afflicted mortal hearts. He witnesses the transformation that awaits all flesh, the dissolution that reduces heroes and peasants alike to indistinguishable dust. Most haunting of all, he dreams of his own funeral, seeing Gilgamesh's grief as though from outside his own body. In these visions, he watches his dearest friend torn apart by loss, sees how love becomes torment when its object is ripped away by forces beyond resistance or negotiation. On the seventh day, as dawn breaks pale and cold over Uruk, Enkidu calls Gilgamesh to his bedside for the last time. His voice, though weak, carries the authority of one who stands at the threshold between worlds, who sees clearly what those still bound to life cannot perceive. My friend, he says, each word shaped with careful effort, do not let grief destroy what we have built together. I am going to a place from which no traveler returns, but the love between us will endure longer than stone, longer than the stars themselves. Gilgamesh grips his friend's hand with desperate strength, as though physical contact might anchor the departing soul to the world of the living. You cannot leave me, he pleads, his voice breaking like a boy's. We were meant to face all challenges, together, to grow old as companions, to be remembered as brothers whose bond conquered every obstacle. But Enkidu's eyes are already looking beyond the mortal realm, seeing visions that belong to the country of the dead. The gods have called one of us home, he whispers. I go gladly, knowing that our friendship has been perfect, complete, lacking nothing that mortal hearts can give each other. His final breath comes with the gentleness of sleep, leaving behind a silence that seems to swallow all sound from the world. Gilgamesh sits motionless beside the still form, unable to comprehend that the other half of his soul has simply ceased to exist. For 7 days and 7 nights, he maintains his vigil beside Enkidu's body, refusing to accept that death has claimed his perfect companion. He speaks to the corpse as though it might still hear, bargains with gods who no longer listen, rages against the cosmic injustice that tears apart bonds forged in love and tested in fire. Only when decay begins its inevitable work, when the flesh that housed his friend's magnificent spirit starts to return to the clay from which it came, does Gilgamesh finally understand that some losses cannot be denied, some changes cannot be reversed by any amount of will or strength or divine heritage. The funeral that follows becomes the stuff of legend. All of Mesopotamia mourns the passing of Enkidu, the wild man who learned to love civilization, the clay-born hero who proved that friendship can transcend the boundaries that separate different kinds of being. Kings and commoners alike weep. His body is laid to rest with honors befitting the greatest of warriors. But for Gilgamesh, the ceremony feels like a mockery of the bond they shared. How can ritual and pageantry possibly capture the reality of a connection that transformed both their lives? How can public grief encompass the private devastation of a soul suddenly cut in half? As the last mourner departs, as evening settles over the cemetery where Enkidu lies beneath his mound of earth, Gilgamesh remains alone with a realization that will change him forever. Death, he understands now, is not merely the distant threat that adds urgency to heroic deeds. It is the ultimate enemy, the one opponent that no amount of strength or courage can defeat. And if death could claim Enkidu, perfect and beloved, then it will surely come for him as well. The divine blood in his veins, the heroic deeds that will echo through history, the love that still burns in his heart like an unquenchable flame, none of it will save him from the fate that claims every breathing thing. For the first time since childhood, Gilgamesh feels truly afraid, not of any external enemy, but of the internal enemy that even now works its slow transformation within his own flesh. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the torchlight, his own death waits with infinite patience, counting down the days until their inevitable meeting. Unless there might be some way to escape the common fate of mortals, some secret known only to the gods, some path that leads away from the country of the dead toward the realm of eternal life. As this possibility takes root in his grief-shattered mind, Gilgamesh rises from beside his friend's grave with new purpose burning in his eyes. If death cannot be defeated through strength of arms, perhaps it can be outwitted through the same cunning that helped them overcome every previous challenge. Somewhere in the world, there must exist the secret of immortality, and he will find it, no matter what the cost, no matter how far he must travel or what dangers he must face. He will become the one mortal who escapes the universal sentence, who proves that love can indeed conquer death through sheer determination to reunite with what has been lost. The greatest journey of his life is about to begin. Grief transforms Gilgamesh into something he has never been before, a wanderer. The king who once ruled from a throne of cedar and gold now roams the wilderness like a madman, his royal robes replaced by lion skins, his carefully groomed beard grown wild and matted. He has abandoned everything that once defined his identity in pursuit of the one goal that matters, finding a way to bring Enkidu back from the realm of the dead. But first, he must confront the reality of his own mortality. Each morning when he wakes, he examines his body for signs of the decay that claimed his friend. Are his hands growing weaker? Does his breath come less easily than before? Is that new line around his eyes evidence of time's relentless advance toward the grave? The fear that drives him goes deeper than simple terror of death. It is the more specific horror of separation, the unbearable knowledge that somewhere in the underworld, Enkidu exists in a state of shadow and dust, while he remains trapped in the world of the living. Their perfect friendship has been split by the one barrier that no mortal has ever crossed and returned to tell about. His wanderings take him first to the tavern of Siduri, the divine barmaid who dwells at the edge of the civilized world. She tends her establishment on the shore of a sea that stretches beyond the horizon, serving wine to gods and heroes while offering wisdom to those wise enough to listen. When Gilgamesh appears at her threshold, wild-eyed and sunburned, she initially takes him for a bandit or madman. His royal bearing has been eroded by months of wilderness living, his divine heritage obscured by the desperate hunger that drives him ever forward. "Who are you, wanderer?" she asks, keeping her door barred against this strange visitor. "Why do your cheeks look hollow? Why is your heart full of grief? Your face is like one who has travelled far. Cold and heat have worn you down." His answer pours out like water from a broken dam. The whole story of friendship, found and lost, of love that makes mortality unbearable, of the desperate hope that somewhere beyond the world's edge lies the secret of eternal life. "Enkidu, my friend whom I loved, has turned to clay," he tells her, his voice cracking with the weight of repeated telling. "Now I fear death myself. I roam the wilderness seeking Utnapishtim, the survivor of the flood, who was granted eternal life by the gods. Perhaps he can teach me the secret of escaping the common fate that claims all mortals." Siduri listens with the patience of one who has heard every form of human sorrow, who understands the patterns that grief follows in its desperate attempt to deny reality. When he finished his tale, she offers the wisdom that comes from watching countless heroes pass her threshold, each convinced that their quest will succeed where all others have failed. "Gilgamesh," she says gently, "you will never find the life you seek. When the gods created mortals, they assigned death to them but kept eternal life for themselves. Fill your belly with good food, dance and make merry day and night, wear fresh clothes, bathe in sweet water, take pleasure in the small joys that make existence bearable. This is the lot of mortals, to find meaning in the brief span allotted to them, not to rage against the boundaries that define their nature." Her words carry the ring of eternal truth, yet they only fuel his determination to prove that some bonds transcend even divine law. If the gods kept eternal life for themselves, then he will find a way to steal it, just as he stole the sacred cedar from Humboba's forest. Siduri sees the futility of further argument and provides what help she can, directing him to Urshinobi, the boatman who alone knows how to cross the waters of death that separate the mortal world from the distant shore where Utnapishtim dwells. The journey she describes would challenge the gods themselves across seas that kill with their touch, to lands that exist outside the normal boundaries of reality. Yet Gilgamesh presses forward with the obsession of one who has lost everything that makes life worth living. He finds Urshinobi beside his strange vessel, equipped with poles of stone that alone can navigate the lethal waters ahead. The boatman, ancient beyond mortal reckoning, studies this desperate traveler with eyes that have seen every form of human folly. The waters of death stretch before us, Urshinobi warns as they prepare to embark. No living thing can touch them and survive. We must cross using only these stone poles, pushing ourselves forward while never allowing the water to contact our flesh. One mistake, one moment of carelessness, and you will join the countless dead who float beneath these waves. The crossing takes days that blur into nightmare. The waters of death stretch in every direction, a black mirror that reflects no light, no hope, no possibility of return for those who fail in their purpose. Gilgamesh pulls desperately, following Urshinobi's expert guidance, while around them swim the spirits of all who have attempted this passage before and found it beyond their mortal capabilities. When they finally reach the distant shore, when solid ground appears beneath their feet like a gift from merciful gods. Gilgamesh sees before him a simple dwelling that seems utterly ordinary after the cosmic drama of their journey. Here, in a house that might belong to any prosperous farmer, lives Utnapishtim the faraway, the only mortal ever granted the gift of eternal life. The man who emerges to greet them, disappointingly normal, not a god disguised in human form, not a hero transformed by divine power, but simply an old man whose eyes carry the weight of having seen too much, having lived too long, having learned truths that perhaps should remain hidden from mortal understanding. Why have you come to this distant place? Utnapishtim asks, though his ancient wisdom has already provided the answer. What brings you across the waters of death to seek one who has found the secret you desire? Once again, Gilgamesh tells his story, pouring out his grief and desperation to one who might understand the true cost of love that refuses to accept loss. But Utnapishtim's response brings no comfort, only the harsh wisdom of one who has learned to see mortality from the perspective of eternal duration. How alike we are, you and I, the immortal says sadly. We have both lost those we loved most. We have both raged against the injustice of separation. But I learned what you have yet to discover, that eternal life is not reunion with the dead, but eternal separation from them. I will live forever, and everyone I have ever loved is gone. They are gone, Gilgamesh, and they are not coming back, yet because he recognizes something of himself in this desperate king, because he remembers what it felt like to believe that love could conquer even cosmic law. Utnapishtim agrees to tell his story. The tale that follows will reveal just the secret of immortality, but its true price, and perhaps convince this grief-maddened hero that some gifts are too costly to accept, some victories too terrible to achieve. Sit down, Gilgamesh, Utnapishtim says, his voice carrying the weight of ages. I will tell you something that no mortal should know, a secret hidden from the assembly of the gods themselves. Listen well, for this knowledge comes with a price that you may not be willing to pay. As evening settles over this strange shore at the world's edge, as the waters of death lap silently against the beach where no living thing should walk, the immortal man begins the tale that will reshape everything Gilgamesh believes about divine justice, mortal worthiness, and the true nature of survival. Long ago, before your great-grandfather's great-grandfather drew breath, the world was different. Men lived in harmony with the gods, offering proper worship, maintaining the balance between earth and heaven. But gradually, as populations grew and cities multiplied, something changed in the cosmic order. Utnapishtim pauses, his ancient eyes reflecting memories that span millennia. The noise, Gilgamesh, that is what finally drove them to it. The constant noise of human existence, our prayers and complaints, our wars and celebrations, our very breathing began to disturb the gods' eternal rest. What had once been the pleasant murmur of worthy subjects became an endless cacophony that shattered divine peace. The story that unfolds seems impossible in its scope, yet carries the ring of absolute truth. Enlil, lord of the earth, finally lost patience with his noisy children and proposed the ultimate solution, a flood to wash the world clean, to silence forever the human voices that disturbed celestial tranquility. The gods agreed. Utnapishtim continues, his voice growing heavy with remembered sorrow. All of them save Aa, lord of wisdom and water, who felt compassion for the creatures they had worked so hard to create. Unable to oppose the divine counsel directly, he found a way to warn one faithful servant, me. The warning came through the walls of Utnapishtim's house, whispered by Aa in language designed to avoid breaking his oath to the other gods while still conveying essential information. Instructions flowed like water. Build a boat of specific dimensions. Gather breeding pairs of every animal. Prepare for rain, such as the world had never seen. 7 days I had to prepare, Utnapishtim recalls, and Gilgamesh can hear in his voice the echo of desperate haste. of impossible tasks accomplished through pure determination, 7 days to construct a vessel large enough to hold the seed of all creation, strong enough to survive the dissolution of the world itself. When the flood came, it surpassed every prophecy of destruction. For 7 days and nights, water fell from the sky with such force that the very ground split beneath its weight. The rivers rose beyond all previous boundaries. The seas climbed over their appointed shores. In a matter of hours, the entire world became an ocean, beneath which every mountain peak disappeared. I watched from my boat as everything I had ever known vanished beneath the waves. Utnapishtim says quietly, cities that had stood for 1,000 years, trees that had sheltered countless generations, people whose only crime was making too much, noise all swallowed by water that rose until it seemed to touch the ceiling of the sky itself. The silence that followed the flood's end was more terrible than its violence. When the rain finally stopped, when the waters began their slow retreat, Utnapishtim found himself floating over a world scraped clean of human habitation. The noise that had so annoyed the gods was gone, replaced by the kind of absolute quiet that exists only in the tomb. But the gods discovered something they had not anticipated. Utnapishtim continues, and now his voice carries a note of grim satisfaction. Without humans to offer worship, to maintain their temples, to acknowledge their power through prayer and sacrifice, they began to starve. Divine beings, it seems, require mortal recognition as much as mortals require divine blessing. When Utnapishtim finally made landfall on Mount Nisir, when he released the dove and swallow and raven to test for dry ground, when he offered sacrifice on the mountain's peak, the gods smelled the sweet savor and gathered like starving beggars around his altar. They were grateful, Gilgamesh, grateful to this one surviving human who could restore the proper relationship between earth and heaven. So grateful that they granted me the one gift they had never given to mortal flesh, life without end, existence without the threat of death. But as Utnapishtim speaks these words, Gilgamesh hears in them not triumph, but tragedy. The immortal man's tone carries no joy, no satisfaction at having achieved what every mortal dreams of winning. Instead, there is only weariness deeper than ocean trenches, sadness that spans centuries without hope of relief. Do you understand what this gift means? Utnapishtim asks, and his question cuts through Gilgamesh's romantic notions like a blade through silk. I am the last survivor of a world that no longer exists. Everyone I loved, everyone who shared my memories, everyone who could understand the references that give meaning to speech all gone. I am eternally alone, forever separated from my own kind by the very gift that preserved my life. This revelation strikes Gilgamesh like a physical blow. He had imagined immortality as reunion with Enkidu, as the restoration of their perfect friendship beyond the reach of death's interference. But Utnapishtim's experience suggests something far more horrifying: eternal life as eternal isolation, survival as the ultimate form of loss. Moreover, the immortal continues relentlessly. The gods have sworn never again to grant this gift to mortals. My immortality was born from their guilt and gratitude, emotions they experienced once and will never allow themselves to feel again. You seek something that no longer exists to be given. Yet even as despair settles around Gilgamesh like a burial shroud, Utnapishtim offers one final possibility, not immortality itself, but something that might serve a similar purpose, a test that could prove his worthiness for divine consideration. Even if the gods no longer grant eternal life to mortal petitioners, if you can stay awake for 7 days and 7 nights, Utnapishtim proposes, if you can conquer sleep as I conquered death, perhaps you will have demonstrated the strength necessary to transcend mortal limitations. The challenge seems simple at everything Gilgamesh has endured. 7 days without sleep, surely a small price to pay for the possibility of divine favor, for the chance to prove that his love for Enkidu justifies bending cosmic law. But sleep, Gilgamesh discovers, is a more subtle enemy than any monster. Unlike Humbaba, or the ball of heaven, it cannot be defeated through strength or cunning. It creeps upon its victims like fog, overwhelming the strongest will through gentle persistence rather than violent assault. On the first day, adrenaline sustains him. On the second, determination carries him forward. By the third day, exhaustion begins its inexorable work, weighing down his eyelids like stones, filling his limbs with heaviness that no amount of effort can dispel. On the sixth night, as he fights to keep his eyes open, while his body screams for rest, Gilgamesh finally understands the true nature of his quest. He is not seeking to defeat death through heroic action, but to deny fundamental aspects of human nature through sheer force of will. Sleep, like death, is woven into the very fabric of mortal existence. To refuse it permanently is to cease being human entirely. When he finally succumbs on the seventh dawn, when sleep claims him, despite his desperate resistance, he wakes to find Utnapishtim watching him with eyes full of compassion rather than disappointment. Now you understand, the immortal says gently. If you cannot conquer sleep, which visits every night and can be overcome with sufficient rest, how can you hope to conquer death, which comes only once and offers no possibility of recovery? The failure breaks something fundamental in Gilgamesh's spirit. All his heroic achievements, all his divine heritage, all his desperate love for his departed friend, none of it is enough to transcend the basic limitations that define mortal existence. He is trapped within the boundaries of his nature, as surely as any common peasant, no matter how extraordinary his individual qualities might be. Yet Utnapishtim, moved perhaps by memories of his own impossible grief, offers one final gift, not immortality, but something that might ease the pain of being human, a plant that grows at the bottom of the sea, herb that restores youth to those who possess it, not eternal life, but the next best thing, the ability to delay death indefinitely through periodic renewal. The plant is called the Old Man Made Young. Utnapishtim explains, eat of it, and your youth will be restored. Continue eating, and you need never age beyond your prime. It cannot grant true immortality, but it can give you time enough to find peace with your losses. Hope kindles again in Gilgamesh's heart, smaller now, but perhaps more realistic. If he cannot bring Enkidu back from the dead, if he cannot transcend mortality entirely, perhaps he can at least ensure that their friendship lives on in his memory for as long as the world endures. Perhaps there is meaning to be found in becoming the keeper of their story, the one who preserves their bond against the erosion of time. With stones tied to his feet, he dives deep into the sea that borders Utnapishtim's island, down through layers of water that grow ever darker and colder, until his lungs burn and his vision begins to dim. At the very bottom, among the coral and silt of the ocean floor, he finds the plant that promises extended life, a strange coral-like growth whose very touch seems to pulse with vitality. When he surfaces, gasping and triumphant, the plant clutched in his bleeding hands, Gilgamesh feels a measure of peace settle over his spirit for the first time since Enkidu's death. Not the peace of acceptance, but the peace of having found a path forward through the wilderness of grief. The journey home begins with hope. But the gods are not finished testing the king who dared challenge their authority. The final lesson in the true nature of loss still awaits, and it will prove more devastating than anything Gilgamesh has yet experienced. The journey homeward should be triumphant. Gilgamesh carries with him the plant of youth, the promise of time enough to make sense of loss, to find meaning in a world that has been emptied of everything that once gave it purpose. For the first time since Enkidu's death, he allows himself to imagine a future that extends beyond the next day's travel, the next night's shelter. Yoshinobu guides their boat across the waters of death with his customary skill, the stone poles pushing them steadily toward the shore where normal rules of existence resume their authority. The immortal boatman speaks little during their passage, but his ancient eyes hold something that might be approval for this mortal who has faced every test with courage. Even if he has ultimately failed to achieve his impossible goal. As they travel, Gilgamesh finds himself planning, not the grand adventures he once shared with Enkidu, but smaller, more sustainable forms of meaning. He will return to Uruk and resume his duties as king, but with wisdom tempered by suffering. He will build monuments to his departed friend, ensure that their story survives in song and stone. He will use the plant sparingly, extending his life only long enough to see these projects completed. Perhaps most importantly, he will learn to find joy in simple pleasures, the taste of bread, the sound of children's laughter, the satisfaction of just rule that improves his people's lives. These may be poor substitutes for the perfect companionship he has lost, but they are real, achievable, worthy of a man who has learned the difference between heroic fantasy and achievable human goods. The guards at Uruk's gate stare in amazement as their king approaches on foot, alone, carrying nothing but a traveller's simple pack and wearing the rough garments of a wanderer. They had given him up 4 dead months ago, when reports ceased arriving of his impossible quest, when even the most optimistic courtiers admitted that no mortal could survive the journey he had undertaken. Yet here he stands, recognizably their king, yet transformed in ways that go deeper than appearance. The desperate hunger that drove him from the city has been replaced by something harder to define, not satisfaction. For his quest has clearly failed in its stated purpose, but a kind of settled peace that speaks of battles fought and accepted, of losses acknowledged and somehow integrated into a larger understanding. My lord, the captain of the guard stammers, falling to his knees, with thought. The priest said prayers for your soul. The court prepared for your brother's succession. How do you live? Did you find what you sought in the lands beyond the world? Gilgamesh looked up at the walls he ordered built, at the city he shaped with his own vision and will, at the people who depend on his leadership for their prosperity and protection. All of it seems smaller now than when he left, yet paradoxically more precious, because he understands its fragility, its impermanence, its absolute dependence on the love and labor of mortal beings who will not live forever. I found what I needed to find, he answers quietly, and there is something in his voice that makes the guards lean closer, sensing wisdom earned through suffering they cannot imagine. Though it was not what I expected when I began searching, word of the king's return spreads through Uruk like wildfire, bringing people pouring from their homes and workshops to line the streets. They cheer and weep and reach out to touch him as he passes, confirming through physical contact that their ruler has indeed returned from the realm of legend to resume his place among the living in the palace. His advisors and courtiers gather to hear the tale of his wanderings, expecting perhaps stories of triumph over cosmic forces, of divine secrets wrested from unwilling gods. Instead, they hear something more profound and more disturbing, an account of failure that has somehow transformed into wisdom, of loss that has become acceptance, of human limitations acknowledged and embraced rather than raged against. He tells them of Utnapishtim and the price of immortality, of the plant of youth stolen by a serpent who understood only its own hunger, of the hard-earned knowledge that meaning comes not from transcending the human condition, but from living fully within its boundaries. I sought to bring back the dead, he says simply, sitting on the throne that had once seemed the center of the universe, but now appears as merely a chair carved from wood that will someday decay. I sought to escape the fate that claims every breathing thing. In the end, I learned that love persists not because we can prevent loss, but because we choose to cherish what we have been given, however briefly we are permitted to hold it. In the days that follow, Uruk witnesses the emergence of a different kind of king, still strong, still decisive when action is required, but tempered now by an understanding of mortality that makes every choice carry greater weight. He rules not with the casual confidence of one who expects to live forever, but with the focused intensity of one who knows that time is limited and must be used wisely. He orders the construction of a great monument to Enkidu, not a tomb for the dead, but a celebration of friendship that transcended the boundaries between nature and civilization, between human and divine creation. The inscription he composes speaks not of conquests or treasures, but of love that found perfect expression in perfect understanding between two souls. As the years pass, as his reign enters its mature phase, Gilgamesh becomes something unprecedented, a king who rules with full awareness of his own mortality, who makes decisions based not on personal aggrandizement, but on what will best serve his people long after he has returned to dust. His wisdom becomes legendary, sought by rulers from distant lands who have heard of the king, who went to the edge of the world and returned with something more valuable than the immortality he had sought. In his final years, when younger men begin to look towards succession and the continuity of the dynasty he will leave behind, Gilgamesh undertakes one last great project, not a monument to his own glory, but a collection of the stories he has gathered, the wisdom he has earned, the understanding he has achieved through suffering and acceptance. He commissions scribes to record not just his adventures, but their meaning, not just the facts of his quest, but the insights it generated. These tablets, pressed into clay and fired for permanence, will carry his hard-won understanding to future generations who will face their own losses, their own desperate temptations to rage against the natural order. Let them know, he tells the scribes, that love makes us vulnerable to the deepest pain imaginable. Let them know also that this vulnerability is not a weakness to be overcome, but the price of being fully alive. Let them understand that accepting our mortality does not mean accepting meaninglessness, but discovering the meaning that emerges only when we stop demanding that the universe conform to our desires. As evening falls over Uruk, as another day ends in the endless succession of days that make up mortal existence, King Gilgamesh sits in his palace garden and feels at peace with the life he has been given, not the life he would have chosen, not the life he once demanded, but the life that has taught him everything worth knowing about courage, love, loss, and the strange grace that comes to those who learn to accept the world it is rather than insisting it become what they wish it could be. The greatest adventure of all, he understands now, is not the quest for what we cannot have, but the discovery of what we already possess, not the journey to the edge of the world, but the journey to the center of our own hearts, not the secret of avoiding death, but the wisdom of living fully in its shadow. The story ends, but its echo continues, whispering across the centuries to every heart that has loved and lost and wondered if meaning can survive such devastation. The answer, earned through the hardest possible schooling, is yes. Yes, meaning survives. Yes, love endures. Yes, it is possible to be human in full knowledge of our limitations and find in that knowledge not despair, but the deepest joy of all, the joy of being exactly what we are. For exactly as long as we are permitted to be. Rest now, noble hearts. The tale is told, the wisdom is given, the love that transcends death has been made manifest in words that will outlive the clay on which they are written. In every heart that loves fully despite the certainty of loss, Gilgamesh and Enkidu are reunited, and their story finds its perfect ending, not in the defeat of death, but in the discovery that love makes even temporary existence eternal.